So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at GmailApp class and how we can interact with content within our Google Gmail, and as well how we can apply labels, move emails, remove labels, and do reply messages to messages that are coming in. So we're particularly going to look at messages that are within the inbox that have a value in the subject of new. So I've got one email here that I've sent to myself and I've responded to myself. So what's actually happening here is that the script is doing the response on it. And this is what we're going to be setting up in this lesson. So when we run the first script where we apply the label, it's going to check the inbox and check to see if the label new email today exists. If it doesn't exist, so it's going to check the label here. If it doesn't exist, then it's going to create the label. It's also going to loop through all of the existing labels and check to see if it does exist, and then go through the threads looking for each one of the threads and checking the subject of the thread and applying a label to that thread. If it's found to include the word new, it's going to move it to an archive. It's going to mark it as read and apply the label to it. So running that script, and it's only going to access that first one there. So when we refresh the page, we've moved it out of the inbox. We've applied the label to it, and this is where that new message is now sitting. We're creating another script that's going to take that, take all of the messages, threads that are sitting within that particular labeled email. It's going to loop through all of the threads. It's going to mark it as unread. It's going to remove the label. We also have an option to reply, so we'll look at that as well. We're going to move that thread to the inbox, and then it's going to also look through each one of the messages and get the subject from those messages. So when we run that function, it's going to take it out of that labeled area, and it's going to move it back to the inbox. So we go to the inbox, we see that there's our message, and that message is marked as unread. So all of this with the scripts coming up in this lesson. So go ahead and open up your drive, and under new, we're selecting and we're adding a brand new Google script. And this is the script that's going to check our Google Gmail account for emails that are going to be matching with a particular label. So I'll call it email test. And we can just keep the default my function. And this is my Gmail account. So what I want is I want to be able to check and pick up emails that are coming in with a particular label. So the best way to apply the labels is to do it through the filter within the Gmail, or you'd have to scan through on a regular basis all of the emails that are coming into the inbox. So with the filtering, you can apply it under the settings and go to the see all settings, and under filters, you can create a new filter. And if the email has within the subject, if the keyword that you're looking for is test or has words or is from a particular user, you can apply a filter to it by creating the filter. And then under the create the filter, you can apply a label to it. And then here you can create a new label. So I'll create a new label, test email. And it's automatically going to apply the label of test email. And then you can also select it to skip the inbox and automatically archive it. So that is going to get applied to any new emails that come in with the test label within the email. And this is one that I've sent to myself. So I'm just going to respond back. And we see now when this test email came in, we get the label being applied to it. And we can also go into the list of emails that have the label and see that within the inbox. So this was one option, which way we can do it. Another one is where we can just select all the emails from the inbox and run a time-based script within the Google Apps script that can check for emails that are coming in. So the way to do this, so I'm going to look to apply a label, and I want to scan through all of the emails that I currently have within my inbox to check to see if any of them match the criteria, and then we'll apply a label to that particular email. So in order to get all of the threads of all of the emails in the inbox, there's a few select methods that are available within the GmailApp class. And the one that we wanted to use is get the inbox threads. So this is going to return back all of the threads within the email, regardless of the label that it might have on it. So this is only what we've got within the inbox here. And it's going to return back all of the threads. And so this is going to be an array that you can loop through. So we can loop through each one of the threads and then return back message. And then right now what we'll do is we'll log the message into the log. So run the function, and we're going to have to accept permissions in order to access the apps, using the app script to order to access the Gmail app. And this is only on the first run. Once you accept the permissions, then you're going to have permissions set for the script, and you can always remove these by going over to the myaccount.google.com/permissions, or you can click the link here where it says Google account. So once you've accepted permissions, it returns back the Gmail thread. And then once you've got the thread, then you can go through the thread object and you can get content from the thread. So let's say we do want to look for within this message, we want to get the subject of that first message. So we can return that back. And this is going to return back the first message in the thread from the first message. So first message. So using the message object, then you can get the first message threads. You can get labels from it. You can get the messages that are contained in there. And we're only interested in the subject right now. So we're going to pull out the subject of each one of the messages that I have. And I only have 2 messages within the inbox. So let's see what happens here. So we've got the Gmail app thread. We've got one for says security alert, other says test, and that's because we've got a new message that just came in, and that's because the Google App Script was granted permissions, so it gives us an alert there that we granted the permissions. So we don't need to track in the message object anymore. And now we want to look within the message subject to see if it contains certain values to it. And this can be done with a string method, so it's just a regular JavaScript string method, and we can check to see if it includes a string that we're searching for. And the string value that we'll search for is going to be new. Or actually, let's see if we've got one with new. So I just have, I'm just going to send a new message to myself so that we can pick one up that does contain a value of new. Save that and let's run. So we see that the first message is true, false, 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 because they don't include the word new in the subject. And so that means that we can apply a condition around this. So if this one contains the word new, then we want to apply some type of condition to it. And so here we want to add a label to the email. So let's set up the label object. So this is going to be representing the label object, and Gmail app get user labels. And within the logger log, we're going to select all the label objects, and we can output those. So we've got a number of labels that are present. So what we want to do is we want to loop through the Gmail label and get the name of the label. So my label, and then using for each, let's loop through, and we'll return back the label name for each one. And then here we can, within the log, for now, let's output the label name, and we're going to use the method of get name. So now we should see the names of all of the labels. So we'll create a temporary array that we'll just call holder. And then within the holder, we're going to push the label name. So what this will return back within holder, now we're going to have a name or an array of all of the label names. So that's all the label names that I have within that account. And we can check to see if a label exists. So if, for instance, I'm actually going to move this object over to the my label, and the label that we want to, I'll just create a new label that's going to be called new email today. So let's just make sure it still runs. So it's still running okay. And we want to check within the holder array if that new email today label exists. And if it doesn't exist, then we want to create the label. So applying a condition, holder, and we can use includes to check to see if it includes the my label. And I'll create a temporary label to hold the object. So this temporary label we can use within a condition to hold the label object. So using the Gmail app, we're going to get user label by name, and the name is going to be the my label. And we're going to attach it to the temp label as an object. So it's going to get returned back. And otherwise, we're going to create the temp label by using the Gmail app class and create label, and then passing in the string value of the label that we want to create. So if the label doesn't exist, so if the new email today label doesn't exist, then we create it. And if it does exist within all of the labels, then we're just going to get it as a label object. So let's use the log and output temp label. So this will return back the label object, and just make sure that it works. So we've got the Gmail label. So now we know that if it includes this, we can use the message object and we can add a label, and it's going to be expecting the label object. So the label object that we're adding is going to be the temp label. So run through it, and let's go back and see if we've got the label added. And there we go. We've got the new email today label has been added. Let's add a color to the label so that we can easier see it. So now if we have the word new with an email that comes in, it's going to automatically apply the label when we run the function within the app script. So you can set this up to run on a regular basis as a trigger. So the triggers are available on the left-hand side. So if you wanted to check and run the function apply label and set it up as time driven, so want it to run it every hour for checking for any new emails that come in, you can run it every hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, so whatever you choose. And if there's any failures, I usually set it to notify me immediately if there are any failures. And so what this will do is this will set up the trigger, and now that trigger is going to run this function checking the inbox for the email with the label and then applying that label to the email. If we want to remove out this particular email, this particular message from the inbox, we can do this as well, where we can use the email object and then we can move it to the inbox, move it to spam, move it to trash, or move it to archive. So I'm going to just go ahead and move it to archive, and this will effectively move it out of the inbox. So let's run this one more time where we apply the label, and that should remove out that email that we've got that we already set and move it out of the inbox to the archive. So let's do a refresh. And effectively we have moved that email. So the email still has the label. It's still present within the labels, but it's been moved from the inbox to the archives. So that way we're not going to pick it up anymore on the inbox. Let's take it and we'll manually move it back, and we'll move it back to the inbox manually. So now what the script does is it's going to scan for the emails with a particular label, and it's going to scan for emails with the word of new in the subject, and if it does have that, it's going to apply the label that we've selected after it scans through all the labels and makes sure that that label actually exists. And if it doesn't exist, then it creates the label. and then it's going to move the message to the archives. And within the message object as well, you can reply to that message. And this can just be a simple string value, and it can just say thank you for the email. So when it moves it to the archive, it's going to also reply to this email. We can also take the email, we can mark it as read, we can mark it as important or unimportant. So there's a number of options here as well that we can apply. So we'll also mark it as read. So right now, select the email, we'll mark as unread. We'll run the code, we'll see what happens. And once the code runs, then we're actually replying to that email. And let's make sure that we do have that email. So it's the label's been applied. Refresh the Gmail list. And we've got the message, thank you for the email, because this is an email that actually originated with us. So we just simply replied to that email. So that gave us another item within the thread, and that's why it's still sitting within the inbox, because that reply is actually the reply to that original email. So you can really easily send out replies to the email that you have after you've selected the message object. So once we have the messages with a particular label, let's select all of the messages with the label. So if you want to have a separate function that manages those, I'll just call it checker. And we're going to select and get the threads. So using the Gmail app, get threads. And the Gmail app, you can also get the thread object that contains all of the messages by selecting out the element with the label. So let's do that first. And this is going to be the label object by the my label, and just get the name of the label there. So we're looking for a particular label name, and this is going to be all of the messages that are contained within that particular label. So now we can use the temp message object, and we can get the threads that are available within that object. And using the threads and for each, we can loop through and return back the message object that is associated with that thread. And within the logger log, let's take the message object, and right now we'll just reply back. We'll just keep the message object there. So this is returning back all the items that have the label, and we're getting all of the threads of those. So going down to run the checker function. So we've got the one Gmail thread. And once you've got the Gmail thread, then you can go back and check what you've got options for the threads. So we already saw that we can add a label. We can also remove a label from the threads. We can reply it. We can move it to the inbox. We can mark the object. There's a number of options here. So you press the dot. You can do the more important, mark as read, mark as unread. So maybe if you want to mark them all as unread. And that's going to be running the method. So let's see what happens to our emails that are sitting there. And let's run that. And we refresh. So now it's marked as unread. And we can also reply to it. So only when it's within that inbox there. So I'm just removing out the message reply. And let's do the thank you to it. So we're responding back, sending the thank you. So that's still sitting there within the main inbox, because that thread is still relevant whenever we do the check where we're applying the label to it. So we're doing a reply, and this is only because we're replying to ourselves. We can do a reply all as well. We've got some options for the reply. We can move it into the trash if we want. We can move it back to the inbox if we want. We can get the number of messages that are there. So within the logger log, so under the message, we can also get the subject of those messages. And let's get the message count into the log. So running And we see that we've got the 3 messages there that are currently within this thread. So that's how many messages we have there. We can do a message. If we want to get all of the messages that are within the message, and I'll just call this messages. And this is actually the thread. This isn't the message. So this can, I'll just rename it as the thread. So this is actually the Gmail thread. Gmail thread, and that's a reserved word. So get the Gmail, the thread, and this is returning back the thread count. And if we want to get the messages that are within the thread, then we could use the get messages, which is going to return back the messages as an object. And that means that we can loop through and we can get each individual message separately. And this is going to return them back as a message object. So let's see what we've got here. So we've got the Gmail message object. And for the message object, you've also got a lot of different options here as well. So you can get the date, the header, the subject. So if we want to get the subject of that, get the subject. So this will just return back whatever the subject is within the message. And then we've got the new value. We've got all of the responses. And the reason that it grew is because we're constantly adding in new messages when we do the reply there. So I'm just going to comment that out as we don't need that. If you want to update and remove the label, then you would do that within the thread object, not within the message. So let's, so we've got an option to remove label. So let's select and we'll remove the label object. And this can only be done on the thread level where you're removing the label. And you have to select the label by doing get user label by name. So that returns back the label object. So in order to remove the label, we could do it that way. And let's take the thread and we'll also move it to the inbox. So we'll move it back to the inbox. So run the checker. We'll remove the label. And now it's moved back to the inbox. So the label's gone. So we have one function that's removing the label, another one that's adding and doing a reply for the label. And then here we're also listing out the subjects of each one of those messages. So that's how you can interact with the content within your Gmail. You can also apply labels, remove labels as needed. And depending on what specific needs you need for moving it into a particular, adding a particular label, sometimes it's easier to just go into the Gmail dashboard under the settings and apply the filter to set the label here, where you can edit it and delete it. Or you can set it up using the script in order to apply the label and run it on a trigger that's going to be a time-based trigger that's going to check the inbox and apply the labels and make the changes to the email accordingly. And I'm just going to delete that trigger.